Hello there, guys. At the risk of sounding like every other YouTuber out there, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click the subscribe button. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and it allows my channel to grow, which means guests like the one you're about to watch, as well as more, would be willing to come on. Just give it a like, give it a subscribe, and we'll go from there. All right, thank you, and enjoy this episode.
There's two, if you want to ask them. One of them is about Enoch, and the other one's about a funny thing that happened to me a few days ago. So you might
We'll
want to
come
make a
to
note
that.
to ask about
We'll come
Enoch.
to that. Guys, I'm on with Nick Griffin, formerly of the BNP. Nick, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Great to be here. Hope we have a good discussion.
No, I think it'll be good. So, Nick, there's quite a few people who won't know who you are. There's quite a few people who will. I was told not to interview you because it would be problematic. I like
Mhm.
talking to people. I'll talk to anyone. So, tell us about who Nick Griffin is. Try and dispel some of those rumors.
Right. So I got involved in politics when I was a very young teenager, first of all with my parents as a young conservative activist. By the age of 15, I thought the Tories were absolutely useless on immigration, dealing with the IRA, the way that Britain was drifting towards being a communist state in the early 1970s.
Hmm.
So I joined the National Front, which at the time, there was not a skinhead in sight. I was one of the youngest people involved at the time. There was quite a lot of middle class folk. Its upper echelons were in fact dominated by retired servicemen, squadron leaders, and such like from the Second World War, and it was Britain's primary anti-immigration party, but had a whole range of policies defending our industries, having a stronger defence force, opposing communism, all these things. It became later on seen as an extreme, far right party, primarily because the Socialist Workers' Party, rebranded as the Anti-Nazi League, put a huge amount of effort into demonising it, as did the BBC, etc. As when the NF, because of that demonisation, basically run its course, I had a couple of years out of politics, particularly having lost my left eye in a rather unpleasant industrial accident, and then got back involved and almost by mistake actually joined the British National Party. When I joined the BNP, it was a political joke. I joined it because it was the only thing on the block which was at least telling the truth. But it was dominated by people who, strangely, I would say all of them actually were British patriots, but equally many of them in their own minds, etc., and in privacy, basically also National Socialists, simply Hitlerite Nazis. I've never been a
Right.
Hitlerite Nazi, but they were. But they were there and they were attracting young people who I could see were going to make all the same mistakes that we had done in the National Front. And because in the NF I'd become a very effective organizer and got a lot of experience, I rapidly became a figure within the British National Party. And in 1998, 99, was saying to people, look, the demographics of this country are so appalling with the immigrant, not just the immigrants coming in, but also our own birth rate,
Hmm.
that in 20 to 25 years' time, it'll be too late to turn this around. It's just the opportunity will be gone. And then
Right.
you have either, well, you become a minority in your own country and all sorts of horrors can and are likely to occur. So we've got 20, 25 years' time to turn this around, which means that we've got to get serious. So we've got to clean up our act. We've got to make ourselves electable. And even if we don't come to power, the threat of it may push the powers that be in the right direction. So we've got to give it a go, which we duly did. I was elected to lead the British National Party in 1999, at which point it had won one council seat 6 years before on the Isle of Dogs in a very strange, very unusual ward that had formerly returned Communist Party councillors.
Hmm.
And the white working class had given up on them because they were supporting Bengali immigration. But apart from that, the BNP was unelectable. And I made it electable. And from the year 2000 until basically 2014, every single election, mainstream election in Britain, the council ones as well as the national ones, were whatever the main election issue was, as the subtext of the whole election was what's going to happen with the British National Party. And it was one of the most successful electoral insurgencies in the whole of Western Europe since the Second World War. It doesn't show up as such, perhaps in the figures compared to the Front National in France, because they had proportional representation and we didn't.
Mm.
So in our best council elections, actually, incidentally, we took in 2008, we took 14% of the vote across the board on average everywhere we stood, which gave us about 60 seats. If that had been in any country with PR, that would have given us 800 or 900 seats. And no one's ever achieved anything like that. So it was quite something. In the end, the powers that be broke the British National Party electorally, primarily by promoting Nigel Farage and UKIP on a huge scale. That was a deal Farage did with the BBC. They would promote him in order to block the British National Party, at which point really my political career in electoral politics finished. And by 2013, I was saying to our people, look, UKIP now dominates this. Obviously, it's now reform in the same way, but there is no electoral space for radical, serious, genuine ethno-nationalists against this populist monster that the BBC sort of created as a sort of Frankenstein's monster. That's still the position. It doesn't mean that there's nothing can be done. And I'm now working a great deal on Substack, which is a very interesting platform with some fantastic writers on it. It's a free app. And I write on that pretty much every day. And I'm in the process of writing the several books that I need to be written. I believe need to be written. One of them with a working title, What is to be Done, which is what to people who are really concerned about the future of this country and the Western world for that matter, but who understand that the reformist type populists will not achieve anything really worthwhile. What should they be doing? There's lots of answers, but for that, you've got to wait for the book.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm sure there'll be some answers in the book there. But I just want to touch on something you mentioned about the demographic replacement. You mentioned that in the 90s, and now it's become mainstream. We've
Yeah.
had, I say we as a whole. I've seen Matt Goodwin talking about, is it 2063, 2065?
Yes.
English will become minority. We're not at replacement birth rates as for our national identity. So yeah, that's interesting that you raised that so many years ago and it was frowned upon, and yet now it's fact and mainstream.
I and the British National Party were ahead of the game on many, many things. Not just that, obviously on the immigration issue and the threat of radical Islam. Also, as another example, now the government's just about deciding, as Donald Trump has done, that going for green power is actually so fatal to our electricity grid that they've got to go for nuclear power stations.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in particular, molten salt reactors, which are very, very safe and very efficient and actually really quite cheap. That was British National Party policy more than 20 years ago, but those specific stations for that particular purpose. So we were ahead of the game on all sorts of things. The idea that outsourcing our industries to everywhere but from Hungary right across to the east coast of China was destroying our industries and would leave us strategically extremely vulnerable. That also, in fact, not just the British National Party, the National Front was talking about that in the 70s. So British nationalists, for all that we've been demonised by various vested interest opponents, we've always got a lot of things right, which other people have caught up with much, much later. Coming back for me to the demographic thing, I want to hammer home to people just how serious this is. That we think in terms of our generation as 70, 80 years. But in terms of a breeding population, a generation is about 25 years. That's how long a woman is effectively likely to be married or have children and remain fairly fertile to. And if you take out the relatively fast breeding immigrant communities in Britain, and actually their birth rate is now dropping like a stone, but if you take out them over the last 30, 40 years, basically since the early 1960s, we've had 2.5 generations, it's going on for 3, breeding generations of demographic disaster in which the average British woman has had not much more than 1 child in her lifetime. Now, some have had 3 or 4, but many have had none. So the average, it looks like 1.8 at present, or 1.7. But if you take out the faster breeding ethnic minorities, not just Muslims, the Orthodox Jews, some of the Africans and so on, if you take them out of the equation, our birth rate since the 1960s has been not much more than 1. That means that the demographics of this country, although the population has carried on going up, partly because of immigration, but partly because the older people have a long lifespan, don't die off, but they can't breed anymore. Mm-hmm. The reality of the demographics of Britain, and actually the whole Western world, plus Japan, China, Singapore, and so on, is that all these countries, including ours, by the end of this century, are going to have an 80% crash in our population. If you forget about immigration, we didn't have that. There's nothing any government can do to stop us losing 80% of our current population. That's the equivalent of 2 Black Deaths. That's why there's no political solution to the mess, because no party on God's earth can deal with the fact that we've got a capitalist system that's based on money created as an interest-bearing debt, which thereby has to grow in order just to be stable, with this demographic disaster. So we're like the Rome in AD 408, a couple of years away from something which is an irretrievable collapse, which does not mean that our people die out. It just means that the civilization, everything we regard as normal, is going to come to a grinding, horrible halt, and we're in a new era.
Why do you think the birth rate has dropped the way it has?
That's a very good question. And obviously, some of the people talk about the Great Replacement. People are just beginning to understand. I think that the Great Replacement isn't just about them coming in, it's they're coming to a vacuum, which we've created ourselves, or our masters have helped to create. So why is it? Well, a lot on the far, far right, and I've used the phrase, in fact, the short speech I gave in the European Parliament about the Kalergi plan, will say, you know, this is a deliberate policy by very malign elements, and the extreme Nazis will say, it's the Jews, yeah, all trying to wipe us out. And there is a problem, actually, in parts of Judaic theology, which, rather like the problem with radical Islam, there's a radical strand there, which doesn't hate, in fact, hate Europeans, hates every people who ever expelled the Jews, and utterly detests and hates Christians. There is an element of that, but it's not the main thing. If that was the thing, then Singapore, China, Japan wouldn't be disappearing as well in the same way. The main thing, it's to do with consumer capitalism and hedonism that goes with it, and capitalism's desperate greed for cheap labor, which we now see as bringing in immigrants coming in from all over the world. But well before that was where they got their cheap labor from. Big business and smaller business as well got their cheap labor by turning women from people who were happy and everyone understood society, it was a good idea that the woman was at home having children and the man on his wage could keep the family. They've twisted it so with a combination of economic pressure, house prices in London, for example, almost no family could exist on a single wage, plus feminism. They created the thing when basically so many women go to work, and especially the more intelligent ones also go to university. So even if they have children, they don't start having children until they've been to university, had a career for a while, got themselves established. Come 35, the biological clock's ticking. They start to think, oh, we've got to have kids. It's too late. They probably have one, and they have quite a struggle to do that because women are designed, and it's an incredible gift from God. Women are designed to have children basically from the age 16, 17, 20, 21, 22. Then their most fertile times are over. So you add together capitalism, hedonism, and feminism, and a loss in belief in the divine, which is the only thing actually which is the predictor for large families, whether it's fundamentalist Christians or radical Muslims or Orthodox Jews. They're the only ones who have large families. As a rule, everywhere else it collapses. So that's why we are in a demographic bust that we are.
It's really interesting. I just want to take it back as a question I wanted to ask you earlier. What drew you to the nationalist side of politics at the time when you joined the BNP? What was it about nationalism as a whole that you were like, yes, that's what I agree with?
Well, you have to go back from that because I joined the British National Party really because I've been in the National Front. So why was I a nationalist at the age of 15? There is very clear evidence that political opinion is one of the things which is quite heavily inherited. If anyone wants to look into that further, there's on Substack, Professor Ed Dutton writes about that a great deal. But there's a lot of evidence, as I say, that political belief is heritable. So my parents were very political. They met at a Communist Party meeting, which they've both gone to with groups of young conservatives in the 1948 election to heckle at. It was the old tradition back in the old days that you went to your opponent's meetings and asked really awkward questions. And my mother was there with very young, age 17, with a group of young conservatives who in North London were thoroughly overawed by these rough, tough communist stewards. A lot of them working class Jews have been in the British Army and so on. Tough fellas, and quite militant and violent like communists are. And on the other side of the hall, there was one bloke who literally at one stage ended up stood on a chair, shouting abuse at the platform and asking awkward questions, not daunted at all. 10 years older, out of the RAF, that was my father. So that's how they met. So I grew up in a very political household. I remember very clearly my parents' excitement when Enoch Powell, sat here by the way, made his speech in 1968, the so-called Rivers of Blood speech.
Yeah.
Finally, someone said what needs to be said. So I grew up in a very political household. My parents, my father especially, had a wonderful idea that one day I might become Prime Minister and go to 10 Downing Street. And when I said I was joining the National Front, they said, well, we understand completely, but wouldn't you be better off staying in the Conservative Party and trying to change things from within? But of course, being young and wild, as all young men should be, I said, no, thank you. I want to be with principle. So that's why I did it. The key reason, actually, immigration was a large part of it. But the more important thing, which someone even your age, let alone anyone younger, would not begin to comprehend, is that we might have been wrong, but in the early 1970s, basically you had a Labour government for 4 years, then a Conservative government, then a Labour government, then a Conservative one. Every time the Labour government got in, it ratcheted things to the left. And every time the Tories got in, they stayed static. So there was a feeling throughout Britain, not just on the right, but on the left, the Labour Party and to the left of that as well. There was a feeling that this combination of ratcheting and communist infiltration of the trade unions and leftist violence on the streets, which had really taken off from 1968 with the 68 generation and the Cold War, there was a feeling that Britain was going the same way as Finland had, towards becoming basically first a neutral state, then a Finland-style state, and ending up as a Czechoslovakia kind of state, ending up in the grip of communism. And we all believed that, really did. Whether it's true or not didn't matter. Everyone left and right believed, everyone deeply political thought that's the way it was going. And it was a fear of and a hatred of communism specifically, even more than immigration, that made me decide there's no point being with the Conservatives because they will not ratchet this back. You have to be with something tougher. And I was really impressed in the first and second general elections of 1974, when every now and again the Daily Telegraph carried a little piece like that about how at a National Front meeting there had been attempts to stop it taking place or to smash it up by a huge mob of communists, and these National Front thugs had fought back and beaten them off. And I thought, oh, they're the people you need if you've got a communist takeover going on.
Seems like history's repeating itself at the moment. If you were to talk to anyone who's politically in tune, they would say that the Labour Party's gone very, very far to the left, almost communistic in its way.
Yep.
I saw a news report, I think it was earlier today, it might have been yesterday. Lucy Connolly, who was put in prison for her tweet, her child has been removed from school because of her mother's political beliefs.
Yes.
Like, to me, that screams communist. Like, that's almost Soviet, the way that people are being treated.
It's very, very extreme. You're right. Yep.
So if we think of the Labour Party being the communist party of your day, not with all due respect, and we apply it to the modern day, what would you say the equivalent of the National Front would be now? Because it can't be reformed, surely.
Well, no, actually, I would say no, the Labour Party of our day is nothing like as hardline as the Labour Party used to be. And the various communist groups, the likes of Antifa and so on, they're not as numerous either as the old hard left used to be. If you want to see probably the real threat of actual communism, you really have to look at the Green Party.
I think that's where it'll come from.
They're even more extreme than the communists. The communists only had an argument with the capitalists really over who would own the means of production, distribution, and exchange.
Yeah.
The Greens, which includes, the Lib Dems, virtually everyone who works in the broadcast media, with the exception of GB News, the Greens don't want to change the ownership of the means of destruction of production, distribution, and exchange. They want to destroy it. Every time, just a few weeks ago, the last coal-fired power station in Britain was closed down. Instead of being mothballed, it was immediately blown up. So they've already made us so reliant on wind and solar power that before they manage to build the next generation of nuclear power stations, if they actually ever get round to it, the lights are going to start going off, the power is going to start going off in Britain when it's hot in the summer and when it's cold in the winter. They've already managed that. So they're even more extreme than the communists were. And it's going to cause big, big trouble. Now, as regards then, who's the equivalent of the National Front or the British National Party? You're right, it certainly isn't Reform. Reform would have been regarded as quite moderate, ordinary conservatives back in the 1960s and would have been happy in the Conservative Party overall. And the more working class ones would have been quite happy still in the Labour Party, because the Labour Party was still, to a degree, especially at grassroots level, simply the party that people were living in council houses in the 1960s. Almost everyone there could remember when those were built. And those incredible, the Parker Morris council houses, when you, in your mind, compare those to the disgusting slums that went before, you can understand why back in the day when I was campaigning for the Conservative Party in the very early 70s, the moment you hit a working class town, almost every single house had a Labour Party poster in it, because people were still proud of and grateful for what the Labour Party had done, and all those people were patriotic. And they regarded the Labour Party as patriotic and on the side of the white working class. So to an extent, that's where the British National Party came from. It was those people, as the Labour Party given up on them, overwhelmingly working class party. But pretty much I was the only middle class person in it, really and truly. So who's the National Front or the British National Party now? Not Reform. In fact, not anybody, because there's various little grouplets, and especially the ones attracting quite a lot of young lads, a lot of young middle class lads as well, who are particularly becoming radicalised, partly because of the unfairness in their lives, that they're demonised second-class citizens, they're overlooked for education at school, for places at university. They know once they get to, if they get a job at all, that they're going to be up against positive discrimination for anyone female, anyone ethnic, anyone not of confused sexuality. If you are a middle-class white boy, you are only just above the bottom of the heap, which is the working class white boys. So there's a lot of reaction going against that. So a lot of them are getting involved with all sorts of really quite radical far-right groups who, unfortunately, none of them have the faintest idea of anything constructive to do. They're talking in the last couple of years about we've got to build community, which is, they're absolutely right. When you're becoming a minority in your own homeland, you have to put special effort into building and strengthening your own community, because all the others do. All the others are allowed to. And if you're not a cohesive community as you become a minority, everyone else will walk all over you and take your share of the pie. That's just the way humans are.
We're actually seeing that quite a lot now, though. Sorry, just to interject. Yeah. We're seeing that quite a lot. Like people that raise the flags, local councils are taking them down, saying that it's upsetting people who ethnically aren't English to try and be as polite as possible. And I mean, I've got a flag. I've seen flags all the time, and I think actually, if this was a Palestinian flag, no one would take it down. If this was I think they call it the Pride flag now. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. It used to be the LGBT flag, the one with all the colours and shapes on it. No one would bat an eyelid about that going up. But you put up your national flag, and it seems like it's the worst thing in the world. And it's where I'm based in Norwich. It's caused a lot of frictions. I can't imagine what it's like in the big cities. You get and I've seen people on TikTok and things like that. People put the flag up, and then a few hours later, someone's taking it down, and there's almost fistfights in the street over it. It's like, it's the national flag. What's wrong with you? I don't understand it.
I know Norwich well. I went to my first National Front meeting in Norwich. And
you were educated in Woodbridge in Suffolk as well, weren't you?
I was indeed. Yeah. Used to live near Halesworth, so it wasn't too far up to.
Oh, not far at all.
Up to Norwich. Used to love up in Norwich, going to the market to the mushy peas stall, which I don't believe is there anymore. But anyway,
I'm not sure. The market's still there. I'm not sure about the mushy peas.
Yeah, but in any case, in places like Norwich, there's actually been more pushback, I think, against the flags than there has been in, say, someone like Birmingham, because the pushback isn't certainly not from Sikhs. Hindus don't give a damn. It's not from the blacks. It's not from the Muslims. The pushback is from middle-class liberals and leftists who, as always, use the ethnic minorities as the excuse for clamping down on any hint of pride in our ethnicity and history and so on. They use the immigrants as the excuse for clamping down on it because they are the ones who hate it. The real problem here, they're not the immigrants, it's not the Muslims. There are issues with them, but the real problem in terms of whether or not we can have our identity, whether or not we're treated fairly or are able to become fairly treated in our own country, that comes from the white liberal left overwhelmingly.
It's interesting that, isn't it? So would you classify yourself as being on the far right? You've always been pegged as that, even when I was a younger man, as a preteen as well. Oh, Nick Griffin, Tommy Robinson, they're the far right. Would you say that's accurate, or is it a misnomer?
Well, it certainly isn't accurate in the case of Tommy Robinson, because the man supports mass immigration into Britain as long as it's not Muslims. He has always supported, in the very earliest days of the English Defence League, they never flew an English flag or a British flag. They only flew two flags, the Israeli flag and the Pride flag. Now that the whole Pride thing has gone so crazy with the mutilation of children, with the trans thing, now even Tommy's against that because it's absolutely unsaleable. But he has always been absolutely okay with the gay thing. And my position on the gay thing has always been that what people do in the privacy of their own homes really is no business of the state. Not because it's right, but because if the state has that much power to interfere, the state has too much power. But the minute people start promoting it as a lifestyle on the streets and so on, that's the point when what they're doing is, because they cannot reproduce normally, they are starting to aim to recruit, seduce, pervert young children. So it shouldn't be allowed anywhere in public. But Tommy's position has always been, although as I say, he's now against the trans thing, he's always been in favour of the overall homosexual thing. So he's in favour of mass immigration, in favour of homosexuality. Everyone can come to Britain and be British. He absolutely loves what I would call miscegenation, race mixing, which many black people don't like because they call it whiting out. They want their kids to look like them. I want my grandchildren to look like me. Fortunately, they'll do. So Tommy is absolutely not on the right. Tommy is a classical liberal who is paid to hate Muslims and to drive Britain towards a civil war, right? Now, I, on the other hand, is it fair to call me far right? I would say not, because I would say if you look at the policies, even of the National Front, which was a bit on the Tory side until we radicalised it, certainly the British National Party under me, we used to say, this is the Labour Party your grandparents voted for or helped to build. So we're in favour of a mixed economy, because I think that things like the power supply and the railways are natural monopolies which should be owned by the government on behalf of the people of the country, so that their profits go to the people of this country and not to, in the case of power, Chinese or French energy companies. I think it's wholly wrong. So I'm well to the left of the current Labour Party on some economic policy. As I mentioned earlier on, there's a huge problem with the whole fiat money banking system. I would have the whole lot nationalised and utterly reworked. That is most definitely not a Conservative position. So I would actually say that real, genuine nationalism is actually quite central, because it takes many what are seen as leftist political positions in economics and social affairs, and many right-wing things in social, on social things such as family values and so on, and brings them together. So I would say, no, I'm not far right, but at the same time, I quite understand that someone says that my positions are far right, and it doesn't bother me if they do.
No, that's fair enough. I understand that. Thank you for sort of clarifying that. I appreciate you've given me quite a bit of your time. So just to finish off, let's talk about the immigration situation. We've touched on it a little bit. So my personal belief is that immigration is a good thing as long as it's controlled. If we need a doctor, then that's fine. If we need an engineer, genuinely, that's fine. I also sort of feel bad that we're draining other countries of their talent rather than having our own homegrown. But where do you stand on the immigration question, and which immigration would you say is okay and which would you say is not?
Well, I would say that any immigration in any large numbers from anywhere in the world is stealing, especially when it's of young people, is stealing good young people from those countries. Basically, immigrants are either worthless, useless, dangerous sponges, which we know some of them are, who come here to live at our benefit, at our expense, so we shouldn't have them. Or they're coming here and they are going to work and contribute to our society. But we've got some 10 million economically inactive Brits because we've got a welfare system which basically encourages people to sit on their backsides and do nothing. And because our education system was utterly devastated by the Labour Party's comprehensive education policy, which is out of hatred of people who got to grammar schools, out of hatred of people who can afford to send their kids to private school, and the Tories' cowardly refusal to try and turn back the clock. So we've got several generations now of people basically deliberately brought up as incompetent morons, as well as not that many of them in any case, and then rewarded if they want to sit on their backsides and do nothing. That needs to stop. Anyone who is fit and able should have to work for whatever dole they get, and people should be encouraged to do proper jobs. And it's so easy for the state, say for a health service, it's so easy for them to go to Nigeria or Thailand and to steal nurses and doctors who've been trained at enormous expense by their people and bring them here, rather than paying decent wages to our own people and raising them and training them to be doctors and nurses. So the very fact that institutions and business have got the option of bringing in cheap labour from abroad, which we need, stops them doing something which fills the gap. And in industry, the gap could be filled by robotisation. So the Japanese, also faced with a rapidly declining population, they're having some immigration from very similar peoples like the Koreans. Even that's causing problems. But overwhelmingly now, they, and China especially, are turning to robots for production in factories. And the fact that our factories didn't need to, the cotton mills in the 60s are the example, rather than modernising, they brought in tens of thousands of Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis came from really poor parts of Pakistan, one in particular, where a huge reservoir had been created. I forgot the name of it. And it had left 100,000 people homeless. And the Pakistani government had reneged on their promise to compensate them. So then they came to Britain instead, which in any civilized world, Britain would have used its clout and its foreign aid to say to the Pakistani government, you fulfill your promise to your people, or we're going to sanction you and so on, and cause you all sorts of problems, not give you foreign aid. And we would have said to the mill owners, you do not bring in tens of thousands of cheap labour and their families to Bradford and Preston and Blackburn and so on. If you want to carry on working, you either employ British people or you modernise your mills. Had we done that, we wouldn't be where we are now. So I'm not generally in favour of any of the immigration that comes in, because one way or another, it's bad for us, bad for them. And overall, because our population is going to be our population, thee and me and our kids and so on, because our population by the end of this century is going to be 20% of what it is now, if we allow continued mass immigration, we will end up being a vanishingly small minority in our own homelands. Now, because pretty much the only countries in the world now with a population above replacement birth rate are Pakistan, Afghanistan, and subcontinental Africa, those are the only places we're going to get them from. And I don't believe that a Britain or a Europe where most of the population, the young population, is African, is going to be any kind of society which is worthwhile, or anything like that which we inherited. And our job, or our only job in our short span on this earth, is to have children and to pass on ideas, so that we're the link in the chain. This is the nationalist position, between the past generations of our people and future generations of our people. And mass immigration, on the scale it is now, breaks that chain. So trying to put that chain back together is our job.
Okay, I understand that. I've got to ask, tell me about the Enoch bust.
Right, the Enoch bust is genuine bronze. Enoch sat for the sculptor. I can't remember the man's name. I think it was Thompson, a very famous sculptor back in the 60s. And Enoch actually sat for this man who produced 3 of this. And Enoch wanted this bust to go in the House of Commons, because there's a tradition that great parliamentarians, which everyone knows that he was, have a bust somewhere on a windowsill in the House of Commons. Of course, the snivelling, rotten excuses for politicians that we've had since then have refused. So therefore, I've got his bust in safekeeping. And then a funny story. And had things gone slightly differently, I would not have been here, because just a couple of weeks ago, I rearranged my office in my study, which isn't this room. And I used to have on my desk, when I did interviews and so on, I used to have Enoch sat on my shoulder. And having rearranged with a new desk and so on, there wasn't room. So I went and bought from a charity shop. I'm a charitable sort of chap. I went and bought a small, one of the old-fashioned CD case stands.
Yeah.
To have by my shoulder like this. And I put it in position and put Enoch there. Absolutely perfect on my shoulder, perfect height, even better than he is here. So that's great. So then I thought, well, I wonder how it actually looks with the lights on. So I got down on my hands and knees to change the light sockets around and so on, to put on my recording lights. And Enoch toppled off the stand, and it's damned heavy, and it's solid bronze. And he's got this vicious, sharp, hard nose, and it came down right next to my head. Now, had it hit me on the back of the head, it would just have probably knocked me out. Had that nose hit me on the temple, I would have been dead. And he would have woken up to the most amazing headlines in every single British newspaper. Nick Griffin killed by Enoch Powell.
Imagine the sensationalization of that. On that note, Nick, thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you. Great being with you. Hope to come on again, perhaps.
No, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good night.